Normally, my homebrew conversions have been limited to mainly Space Marines, but a viewer of the channel dropped me a message with an interesting idea for a commission. Instead of a Space Marine, this homebrew was for a Sisters of Battle order, and specifically for a Canoness. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video, I'll be showing you how to convert a Canoness from the Order of the Sanguine Scripture. So for this conversion, I started off with a basic Canoness model from Games Workshop. It comes with a whole bunch of weapon options and is pretty modular for a modern Games Workshop kit. I began by removing all the parts required to build the body from the sprue before cleaning up the mold lines with my knife. Once the parts had been removed, I was ready to assemble. However, I intended to mount the miniature slightly differently to the base, so the small tab beneath the right foot needed to be removed. This was pretty simple to do. I first used my clippers to remove the bulk of the tab before then using my knife to smooth out the sole of the foot. With the slight modification to the foot completed, I could then start to assemble the legs together. I began by attaching the left leg before gluing on the front of the legs. Now the problem I had here was the unsightly seam that runs down the sides of the robe, where the two components line up. This is a common problem with lots of kits, and knowing how to tackle it is useful knowledge. For something like this, a lot of people would recommend using some green stuff or other putty to fill in the gap, but for only a small gap like this one, putty is unnecessary. Instead, I took my plastic glue and carefully applied some more glue directly into the seam. As usual, I'm using Deluxe Materials Plastic Magic because of how helpful the brush applicator is. With the glue applied, I then pressed the two halves together with as much force as I could comfortably apply to the parts without breaking them. By doing this, small glue melted plastic started to get squeezed out in little bumps along the seam's edge. I held my grip in place to allow these to dry. The plastic that had been melted by the plastic glue helped to fill up the seam, but the excess then needed to be removed. Once I had given a chance for the melted plastic bumps to firm up a bit, I then grabbed my knife and carefully scraped it along the surface, running the knife slightly perpendicular to the seam. This scraped away the bumps and helped to smooth out the seam without the need for any additional materials. With the legs prepped, I could start the first part of the conversion, replacing the pillar that the Canoness stands upon. This homebrew order, the Order of the Sanguine Scripture, was formed following a gala field failure during warp travel. Their flagship, Saint Numara's Vision, was besieged for 2 days by demons. So, to represent this victory over a demonic incursion, I resorted to some dead animal bits, and grabbed a bloodletter skull with a broken horn from the Citadel Skulls set. I began by testing out the fit of the model against the skull and the base. This was done to see if I needed to make any more trims, in addition to removing the tab from the foot earlier on. Luckily, the skull was at a height perfect for the Canoness to be stood upon. So, I started by gluing the skull to the base first. Once glued, I checked the fit again, just to double check I was happy, and then proceeded to glue the legs to the base as well. With the legs attached to the base, I began to assemble the rest of the torso. Of the two available in this kit, I selected the more armoured option. This was due to another aspect of the custom order, and would influence the head option that I selected later on. Another key aspect of this custom order is enshrined in their name, the Order of the Sanguine Scripture. During the gala field failure, the sisters on board the Saint Numara's Vision began to keep an account of the names of the fallen and the events that led to their demise. However, their ink soon ran dry, and so they began to document those who had sacrificed themselves in the blood of the dead. The scripture written in spilled blood of these martyrs became imbued with holy power, and began to cause the encroaching demonic horde to burn, giving the sisters enough time to hold them off before the gala field was reinstated. So to represent this extremely important aspect of this order, I chose the large scroll component from the Cleric Acolytes kit. However, before I could use this component, I need to see how it works against the Canoness model. So, I temporarily attached the left arm to the torso with a lump of blue tack. Even though the hand is still holding a weapon, having this arm temporarily in place meant I could compare the scrolls against the arm and the rest of the model. This gave me an idea of where I would need to make cuts and adjustments to the components. I started off by reducing the length of the scroll by first clipping off the small tassels at the bottom using my clippers before using my knife to flatten out the bottom of the scroll. Next, I needed to adjust the hand that was holding the scripture. This was much too big for the time being, so the hand needed to be carefully trimmed and shaved back to reduce its size. As I was performing these trims, I tested out the fit against the hand a couple of times and adjusted the wrist joint of the hand accordingly to ensure I could glue the two sections together. In addition to this, I also took this opportunity to remove the small bumps just below the hand that would have normally attached to the Carrack Acolyte's forearm. With the scroll trimmed and the hand in a more realistic Sisters of Battle scale, I needed to fill in the chaotic text imprinted onto the surface. For this task, you could use green stuff, but I personally prefer to use Deluxe Materials Perfect Plastic Putty. It's easy to use, dries really quickly, and can be filed and sanded smooth. So I took a lump of the putty and pressed it into the depressions on the surface of the scroll, and continued to do this across the whole surface. By wetting my finger, I was then able to smooth out the putty to ensure that the whole surface was covered over. With this done, I need to leave the putty to dry for a few hours. After giving the putty plenty of time to dry, I then began to file down the surface. This removed any putty from the scroll that wasn't filling up an indentation, and so left me with a blank surface to paint. Once I was done, I was left with the scroll covered in a bunch of white text. At this point, the scroll was complete, but I still didn't have a wrist to attach it to. So I removed the left arm from the torso so that it could be better made some adjustments to, and now you can see the benefit of attaching it with blue tack rather than glue. I then removed the pistol from the arm by using my clippers first and then cutting at the wrist. This was then followed by a knife to help smooth out the cut a little. With this done, I could compare the two halves of the wrist together to identify exactly where I needed to make the adjustments. With the arm and scroll prepped, all that was left to do was to double check the fit against the wrist before properly gluing the arm to the torso, and then finally attaching the hand to the scroll. Now that the scroll was fixed in place, I could go about assembling the model as per the regular instructions. This involved attaching the Blessed Blade and the back of the torso to the front of the torso before assembling the backpack together using the Iron Halo option. However, I didn't attach the backpack just yet, as I wanted to keep this separate in order to help make the painting a little easier. With most of the model assembled, I could continue adding small details that would throw back to the idea of this order, revering the power of blood and sacrifice. So I took a few blood drop icons from the Primus Blood Angels upgrade sprue. I attached the small book to the waist at the front of the model before gluing a teardrop trinket to the power pack. Much like how I selected the more armoured torso option, I also went ahead and chose the helmeted head from the Canoness kit. However, much like the power pack, I plan to keep this component separate to make the painting easier. And here we have the completed Canoness from the Order of the Sanguine Scripture. The model was painted with some very dark, greenish coloured robes, along with some deep maroon on the gloves. The armour was kept fairly straightforward, as it was painted in a pure steel colour, with the fleur-de-lis symbols painted in ivory. Finally, the most important aspects of the model, the blood iconography, were painted in bright reds, especially the list of the fallen sisters depicted on the scroll. The red allowed it to really stand out against the more muted tones of the rest of the model. Once again, it was great to have the chance to tackle another homebrew conversion, and I am incredibly happy with the result. And so, as always, I just want to say a big thank you to all of my supporters and the folks who use my affiliates links. If you would like to help me out in making these videos, you can support me on Buy Me a Coffee as a one-off or as an ongoing membership, and you can find a link to that below. Your help is always greatly appreciated. If you like this video, then check out my other conversion guides, and please do consider subscribing. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.